So on that day, we were on our way to school, and it was a beautiful morning in San Miguel de Allende in early spring, and we had said goodbye to my parents, and me and my siblings went into our separate classrooms, and my parents headed back home on a 2 kilometer dirt road back to the ranch, and they were ambushed by a group of kidnappers. A SUV came up from behind and rammed them into an SUV that was in front, and so there was no way that they could get out. And at the same time, a man came out from the left and one from the right. The one on the left, on my father's side, had a hammer and opened the window with the hammer and injured his head on the left side. And then my mother was brought out at a gunpoint. And with adrenaline pumping and trying to get away frantically, she latched onto the barbed wire fence that was going across along the road, and severely injured her hand. Somehow they were able to tie them up and throw them into the back of the SUV. They put pillowcases over their heads, and they drove off with them. My mother was then left on the side of the road in that SUV that they had been first kidnapped in, and the kidnappers got out. And I want you to know that everything, these were professionals. These guys knew what they were doing. It wasn't just some drug team that was trying to make an extra buck. These were professionals. They knew what they were doing. They had done it before, and everything was done in silence. Everything was exact and precise. And when my mother was left in the SUV, they jumped into another one and headed off with my father, and they were able to successfully get away. While all this was going on, I was on a field trip at the next city over, called Dolores Hidalgo, and I never really knew what was going on until I got back to the house that evening. But I do remember when my teacher and the chaperone, the driver of the bus, Jose Luis, when they were told, I still remember the reaction on their faces. And I knew that something was going on, but I didn't want to ask what, and I didn't want to ask any details. When they told us that we weren't going to be able to go back to the ranch where the school was, I asked why, and they said that because there was some type of military research being done on the ranch, which was very strange to me because this is my ranch, and if anything like that were to happen, I would have known. But again, I didn't ask too many questions, and I just went along with it. We went back to town where the kids usually got picked up in the mornings at a restaurant called Pollo Feliz, and I was surprised to not see my parents there to pick me up. It was my mother's Ford Explorer, and it was my older brother's ex-wife, now wife at the time, that was there to pick me up, and she was clearly in shock. She had black bags under her eyes. She was very, very stressed, clearly in shock. And I remember on the way back to the house, she was driving like a mess. She kept on hitting the sides of the road and the Cera, what we call the little place where you can walk on the side of the roads. When I got to the house, to the ranch, to the front gate, I was surprised to see that there was a lot of military activity. Not military, but police. Suburbans, trucks. In Mexico, there's a lot of types of police. There's federal, municipal, and the AFI, which is the FBI, and they were all there. When I arrived to around where the stables were on the ranch, I was surprised to see my older brother and my cousin Alonso, very close cousin of mine, if not the closest. And it was also very surprising to see them because I knew that they were in Mexico City and that they weren't supposed to come back for at least another 2 months or 3 because they were studying in Mexico City. But nevertheless, I was super excited to see them, so I ran out of the car and greeted them. And they didn't say much. It wasn't like the normal people that I knew. Alonso, my cousin, he asked if I wanted him to accompany me to school to pick up my stuff, and I said yes. So we started walking along that cobblestone road, 2 kilometers to school. And I remember to this day getting to the place where the kidnapping actually happened. And there was glass all over the floor, and to the left on the on the barbed wire fence, there was these cement white poles that held it up. And on one of those white cement poles, of course it's all white, so you could see any color on it. And it was full of this red paint that I thought was. Later I would find out that was my mother's blood. We walked the rest of the way to school, picked up our stuff, and you know, at the school, of course, they knew what had happened because the school had to be shut down and everything minutes after it all happened. But they didn't say anything. I still wasn't told. But I stayed quiet. I didn't want to ask any questions. We got back to the house, and when we got to the house, I remember opening the door, the front door, and it was full of cops in uniform, and Afi agents in black suits. And when I went to open the kitchen door, the next door over, I was used to opening the door and smelling delicious food and looking to the right and seeing my whole family at the table with my dad at the head. And this was without a doubt, you know, it was like a religious thing. It happened every single day. We sat together after we came home from school, and we would eat together and talk about the day. And I was surprised to see that there was no one at the table. My father wasn't at the head. There was no food. Everything was turned off. And as I stood there kind of taking it all in, because it was very odd, my brother came in from the other side, and he told me that my mother wanted to speak to me. And that was when she told me that they had kidnapped my father. I was the only one told at the moment. My siblings didn't get told until maybe 5 or 6 days in. They were told that my father was on a business trip and that it was very important that he wasn't going to come back for a little bit.
So your mom communicated to you what had really happened?
Yeah, I was old enough to you know, not go along with something like that. I knew that something had gone up, that had happened. And I mean, it must have been one of the toughest things my mother's ever had to do, you know. She was in the bathroom and she had her hand up in the air, bandaged up, and I kept on trying to put words into her mouth, you know, saying everything but that my father had been kidnapped. Until she said, "Nando, please just let me finish." And of course she was in tears, and I mean, she looked sick. She's this vibrant, healthy woman that was full of life, and she was still in shock. She was pale. It wasn't the woman that I knew. And she told me this morning on the way back from school, a group of kidnappers ambushed us and they took your father. But she made it very clear that she actually made a promise to me. She said, "I will do anything and everything that I possibly can to get your father back." And I didn't say much at the moment. I was just taking it in. As soon as she finished talking to me, I left the house. I ran out and I jumped on an ATV that I had, and I started riding to this spot. It overlooks the ranch. It's a beautiful big rock on the side of a hill, and I just started crying for probably around 30 minutes. When I did, you know, kind of hold back the tears and bring myself back to reality, I drove back to the house, and I was met by my brother, my cousin, and my mother, and they were terribly worried of where I was. And when I told them where I was, they told me that I was never, ever to go back there, because this was one of the places where these kidnappers had been stalking us for the last 2 or 3 months, watching our every move. So of course I never went back. I mean, the ranch was like a little bubble. It was our little paradise. Sometimes we would spend months without even having to leave. I mean, the school was right on the ranch. We had a chauffeur that would drive in the mornings to town to pick up the necessary things for the day, the supplies. And then we had a cook that we were told by a lot of people around that we had the best restaurant in town, you know. So there was really no need to leave. We had my two older siblings and their family also lived on the ranch, and we were just a happy family, you know. Nothing ever, no evil, nothing, you know. So this was definitely, it was our first encounter of evil. It was first encounter of reality, of you know, wake up. Yeah. As the oldest son, even though I was 12, I definitely took on I think in one day I grew about 2 or 3 years. Um, I definitely became closer to my siblings. I probably became less of a brother and more of a father figure for them, and they probably tell you the same thing. And my mother, the first probably week and a half, I've never seen my mother like that in my life. I mean, she could barely eat. I think for the first 3 days she only had orange juice, and it's one of those moments where even the simplest of decisions, of decision making, is incredibly hard for some reason. It feels like you've been hit with a sledgehammer on the side of the head, and you're kind of like trying to pull yourself together. And it was tough. It was tough. The first few nights I slept with my brother, and you don't go to sleep fairly easy. You have all these questions in your head. And as a 12-year-old, of course, I wasn't being told everything that was happening, just enough to know what's going on.
Right. What kind of updates were you getting? Was your mom, effectively communicating?
No,
things?
definitely not. My mother, I think, out of love and wanting to shield me from the reality, she didn't tell me much. Everything that I learned after the first day was either through stuff that I heard from conversation that my mother was having with the AFI agent, or things that my older brother would tell me. My older brother was really the one that, because he knew the relationship that I had with my father. The relationship that I had with my father was that, if it's something and it's real, he's going to tell me straight up how it is. There's not going to be cutting around the bush, and that's not how my mother was. My mother was a lot more diplomatic. It was tough for her to tell me exactly what was going on. So that was tough for me. That was very tough for me. And I think months going in, it led to me believing that my father was never going to come back. After a week passes, 2 weeks passes, you hear on TV and in movies, kidnaps don't really go on for 8.5 months. It's a couple of days or a week or so, and the person comes back. But about a month or two in, maybe 3 or 4, I started to believe that my father was never going to come back. And I got to the point where I was okay with that. I became a bit rebellious. I started not going to school. I started living more at friends' houses than at my own house, even at 12 years old. And it's hard to imagine thinking back. I think to this day, even, I know I'm jumping up ahead, but I think it is very safe to say that me and my family, all of us, without exception, have a case of PTSD. I know driving through traffic sometimes when I get to a red light, I never get close to the car in front to where I can't make a quick decision to get out of the way. When someone comes up behind me, I'm always on the lookout. It's a constant thing now. And it's something that I've learned to live with, but I think it'll be there for the rest of my life.
Right. So at this time, clearly your mom was doing most of the, behind the scenes, negotiating, things like that. Did she have anybody helping her at this time?
So the first few days, no. There was no one helping. My older brother from my father's previous marriage, he was definitely at the ranch a lot and at my mother's side, but there was no one telling her what to do. And of course, living in Mexico, we had heard of instances where in a kidnapping, in a case like the one that we were living, the police many times are affiliated with the criminals. They're in bed with them. So we didn't know if we wanted to go with the police. They had already been contacted, but we didn't know if we wanted to stay with them to keep the negotiations with them. We called a couple people from abroad. I know some company in the UK, but it was out of our price range. Way too expensive. So somehow my mother got in contact with an old friend of my father's that had some type of contact with the Mexican FBI. It's called AFI. And they sent an agent to help with the negotiations. His name was Ramon. And it was a little rough when he first got there. He got sent on a public bus. And when my mother went to pick him up and he came down the stairs of the bus, it looked like a kid who had just finished high school. It wasn't this FBI agent that we had in mind. He wasn't armed. He was a little nerdy looking, And he was a beautiful guy, and you know, he's an angel in my heart to this day because he got my father back, or helped get my father back. But it was definitely hard at the moment to say, wow, is this guy really the one that's gonna help us with these negotiations against these horrible criminals? My father had all the money under his name, so my mother didn't have any way to access that money. So the figures of money that they were asking for, I mean, number one, they were completely out of our price range. We were talking about numbers that we had never even thought of before. And number two, even if we were able to get to some type of mid-ground to where we could meet them with the ransom that they were asking for, how are we going to access that money? So it was a nightmare. Everything about it was a nightmare. And like you said, there was no one there to help my mother out with any of those decisions. When it came down to it, she was alone, completely alone.
Was there at any point where your siblings did figure out what was going on?
About a week and a half, my mother called a therapist to come to the ranch. She had already met with her a couple times before this had all happened, so she knew it was a person that she could trust. So she came to the ranch and they sat down with my siblings and me, and with the three of us, we told the kids in a G-rated manner what had happened. And of course they were full of questions, and with the help of the therapist we were able to tell them what was going on. Well, I think up until probably from like the 4th or 5th month on, I had in my mind that for sure he was never going to come back. I thought that my father was dead. And we lived in a very small town, in a small community where everyone knows each other. So, of course, people start to talk and gossip and say things that aren't true. So, you know, when I went to school, I would hear things from the kids and from parents and stuff that simply weren't true. But as a 12-year-old, you take that into, you know, when adults are saying these things, you think it's true. So, yeah, I for sure believe that my father was never going to come back. And I would tell my mother whenever she would try to say, you know, things are moving along, or you know, I'm going to get a helicopter ready and doctors on stand call because we might be coming close. I was like, please, Mom, like, come on, like stop dreaming. My father's never coming back. But I think there was a moment around Christmas, around December, where the whole family came together and we were talking about my father a lot. And the kidnappers had sent proof of life, and I actually saw the picture, and it was very tough to see. I mean, it didn't look like my father. It looked like 20 or 30 years had been sucked out of him. I was 12, almost 13 at the time, and he weighed less than me. You know, there's a man that weighed normally around 165 pounds, and he came out weighing less than 90. So you can imagine what that picture did to me. You know, seeing your father in that state is pretty tough. But nevertheless, I saw that was my father, and he was holding up a newspaper with today's date, or with the day's date, and the idea started coming in, and wow, maybe my father might be coming back, and maybe this nightmare is going to come to an end, and we'll be a family again. It was actually on my birthday, January 23rd, that the ransom had been paid. And that was also a strange incident because the manager of the ranch and the chauffeur of the ranch, they had been chosen by the kidnappers to be the ones who delivered the ransom. It was in Mexico City. And after a day of going to different checkpoints and meeting the kidnappers' demands, they were driving the Jeep where my parents had been kidnapped, so they knew the car. And not only they knew the car, but they had them put a T on the top of the roof with duct tape, silver duct tape, so that they could easily know that was the car. Once that day came to an end, they were told to drive to some specific road. Now that road was closed by two cop cars. And Gustavo, the manager of the ranch, walked out with a suitcase of money and delivered it to the kidnappers, but he never came back. He, on top of giving the money, Now we didn't have my father yet, and the manager of the ranch was now kidnapped as well. So that was tough. And that was probably the 22nd. So on the 23rd, on my birthday, of course, as you can imagine, my only wish was to get my father back. And on the 24th, as I was getting ready to go to school, brushing my teeth in the bathroom, my grandmother came running into the room in tears with my little sister and locked the door behind her. And that was when she couldn't really talk, but I saw that something was going on. And she jumped into the bathroom with me and locked the door behind her and started crying. And I was telling her what was going on. Is everything all right? I was a bit scared. And she looked up and told me, "Your father's here. Your father's at the kitchen." There wasn't any helicopter that had to be sent. There was no doctors that had to be called. The first couple of days, I still remember running out of the room when I heard that my father was back and running to the kitchen. And of course, when he saw me, he got on his knees. And he weighed less than 90 pounds. He hadn't eaten, and he had been shot twice. He'd been tortured. Every day he had been hit. He had been kept in a little closet, just inches bigger than him, with a light constantly on him so that he didn't know what day was, what night was, and a loudspeaker constantly going on so that he couldn't hear anything from the outside. Completely isolated. And 8.5 months of that, it changes a person. And to this day, I don't know how I have a sane father. But those first few days, I wasn't so much of a son. I was more of like a caretaker. I remember even walking upstairs for him. I caught him sometimes. It happened at least 2 or 3 times where he just lost his balance and started falling backwards. So it was constantly having to be there for him and to be at his side. He had this fixation on always grabbing food and putting them in his pockets because he had been starved for so long that he constantly wanted to be eating. Seeing him and hugging him and while he's crying, he lifted up his shirt and said, "Look what they did to me." And to this day it gives me shivers. Yeah.
So how did the family dynamic change? How did this impact, still today, this situation impact your life, your family's life?
Huge. Like I said, we all suffer from PTSD. But I think during the moment, like I said before, it was a point where I'm not a kid anymore. I'm the oldest in the family, and I have to be there for both my mother and my father, and also my siblings. So I kind of put all my emotions to the side, and I don't think I was really digesting really what was going on. So to tell you the truth, probably the most difficult time for me was months later, when things did start to go back to normal, and we started getting back into a routine of life now in the States, because we had to leave Mexico. That was really when things hit home, when the reality of things sunk in. And of course we were still having to negotiate the manager of the ranch getting back out. So even though we were in the States with my father back, in the safety of this country that has given me much more opportunity than my own native country, we were still having to deal with that nightmare that we had tried to leave. And I think, unfortunately, I heard a number the other day that there's around 30 to 40,000 kidnappings in Mexico a year. Now, out of those, only about 1,000 and a half get reported to the police. So you have around 39, around there, 1,000 kidnappings that go unreported. And these are people that don't have the option of moving to the States when they get their person back. So, I feel very fortunate to be in this position and to be able to share my story and create consciousness about the reality of the matter. And not only that, I think I never really went to... I went to a couple sessions of therapy, but they never really worked for me. I guess I wasn't the type. I know therapy works for a lot of people, but for me it made me angry. Maybe it was because of the questions that the therapist was asking, or I just felt like they didn't understand, or I don't know. There was something that just wasn't clicking. So I think that the biggest therapy for me has been telling my story, like I am here with you today. I thank God for what happened, because I don't think that we would have ever left Mexico. And I can't stress it enough that I am eternally grateful for everything that has happened in my life. My father's kidnapping, everything that I had to go through during that, and even my mother's death, you know. And I absolutely believe that my mother's death had an enormous amount had to do with the amount of stress that she endured during those 8.5 months. It makes me think a lot now working with, or not working with, but knowing that an organization like Hostage US is out here. It makes me think, you know, if we had had an organization that did half of what this organization does back when my mother was going through the first days of making decisions and trying to pull herself together and negotiating my father back. Like I said before, I can't help but think that maybe the stress level that she had then, of course it would have been less. And if that stress would have been less, maybe the cancer wouldn't have come back when she got out, and maybe she would still be here with us today. So I think it's a fantastic thing what you guys are doing.
Well, thank you so much for sitting down with me and
Absolutely.
explaining all this.
It's been a pleasure.